Hi, good morning everyone, and welcome to this session about climate action plans from London and metropolitan areas. My name's Gina Dowding. I'm a county councillor in Lancashire, a councillor on Lancaster City Council, and for a very short and wonderful time I was Green MEP for the northwest of England, but we won't say much about that this morning, other than if I get time I'll share some links of the reports that I wrote in that position. We are going, as will always be the case, going to be very tied for time this morning. So we're going to crack on with the first of our 4 speakers. We'll be monitoring the chat button and hopefully we'll have some time for questions at the end. Well, we will make sure that we get at least a couple of questions in, but we'll wait till the end of the presentations before we do that. So welcome everyone. I think we have Ben, who's our tech host, who's going to be admitting people as we go along. And we're going to start with Martin O'Brien, who's a climate resilience manager in Lewisham Borough Council and has got some slides to share. So over to you, Martin, and thanks for coming.
Okay, great, thank you very much. I'm gonna attempt to share my screen. Tell me if that's worked.
That's up, yep.
Yeah, okay, great. And I'm trying to go into presentation mode. Okay, great. Well, thank you very much for having me along. Yeah, I'm Martin O'Brien, Climate Resilience Manager at Lewisham Council. Lewisham declared a climate emergency in 2019. And then in March this year, we published our action plan to deliver on the ambition for the borough to be carbon neutral by 2030. This picture here, hopefully that you can see on my first slide, is the one that we put on the front of our climate emergency action plan when we got it signed off by our mayor and cabinet in March and published it. If you don't know Lewisham, it's in South London. The north of the borough borders onto the Thames, so we are an inner London local authority, a highly diverse and also a very young population. And this picture here was taken right in the heart of Lewisham. And I think what we're trying to conjure up with putting it on the front of our plan was that kind of juxtaposition of density and green space that can be so magical, such a magical part of London. But also personally, having worked on climate related activity, carbon reduction, energy for 10 years in the same local authority, I kind of feel like, you know, this picture sort of resonates with me because when the climate emergency came along, it was like a breath of fresh air, and in a sense, a kind of green corridor opening up that said, "Come this way." I mean, I'm only partly saying that to get you all in my good books, but genuinely, it did actually feel like that. 10 minutes community engagement, 8 minutes now, and I could spend 8 minutes on this slide. So you're going to have to just sort of let it wash over you in a sense. But this slide shows our baseline of carbon emissions in the borough, and the reason why I'm putting it up in relation to kind of community engagement is that green slice at the top of the circle there, the green slice of the pie chart, which is 3% of the measurable emissions in the borough come from the council themselves. And so, you know, it's not within our control to deliver on the ambition to be carbon neutral by 2030, only by doing the things that we own ourselves, that we control ourselves. As this pie chart shows, 50% of the local emissions come from housing, 25% come from transport. So, you know, I think that, you know, one key message for us was, you know, that it's right for us to be ambitious. And it's really important that the public sector is at the forefront of all of this, but it's also important that, you know, delivery is not just laid at the door of local authorities and we are held to be responsible for getting there on our own. This next slide is from a study that we did to inform our action plan, which again, I won't have time to go through. So you might just have to kind of look at it as a sort of piece of Mondrian art. But the reason I've put it up is that we developed these scenarios, and you can see some dotted lines stretching across this slide. The scenarios we called baseline, core action, radical stretch, and systemic change. And within each of those scenarios, we had built up a series of projects that became more and more ambitious, and we're about trying to say, well, if we did this, then how far would it take us on our target of being carbon neutral? And the headline of all of this is the cost. That delivering on the systemic change scenario cost a minimum of £1.6 billion over the 10 years. And that turned out to be the entire council's discretionary spend over that 10-year period. In fact, that was back then, before COVID. Given that we've got a hole in our budget of £60 million this year because of the loss of income and extra expenditure, it's going to be far more than our own discretionary spend. And so there is no way that Lewisham Council can actually front up the cost of getting us to systemic to carbon neutral. And what this exercise did was show us exactly how hard it was going to be to get anywhere close. So forget Joe Wicks and 24-hour fitness, because this is properly hard. And the hard bits, the really hard bits, are when you look at the bar in the year 2028, 29, that coloured bar there, and that big chunk of orange is domestic heat. And it's domestic heat, and then the kind of pinky purple ones, which are car travel. Those are the ones that, despite huge amounts of efforts that we've put into some of the actions that get us to that point, there is still over half of our emissions remaining in 28, 29. And that's the real challenge. Unpacking the actions that we had in our scenarios show that it's a problem about infrastructure, it's a problem about economics and fiscal policy, but it's also a challenge around hearts and minds, because how people heat their homes and how people choose to travel is influencing decisions on those is about engaging with people. So this next slide, again, quite a busy one. It is kind of showing some of our it's a snapshot of some of our community engagement activity. When we developed the plan, we put together a mailing list of residents who were interested. We ran a survey. We did a lot of work with local community group Climate Action Lewisham. We're very lucky to have them challenging and pushing us, but also being really supportive of us. Again, I'm only saying that because I think, well, no, I'm not only saying that because I think some of them are in the audience. They genuinely were very supportive, but also gave us some challenge. Here we, in the bottom left-hand corner, got my colleague Emma holding a session with some of our most toughest audiences. I'm nowhere to be seen in that photo, but in the one just to the side of it, there is a picture of me. You can tell it's pre-COVID because I'm wearing one of those archaic items of clothing called a tie, which that's something that doesn't seem to have lasted into the pandemic. But yeah, we held an event, public event. Extinction Rebellion came along outside, and I kept a copy of the flyers that they were handing out, saying that Extinction Rebellion supports Lewisham's response to the climate emergency. Because I was like, well, have I gone too far? Am I doing this wrong? Because it felt like, trying to keep Extinction Rebellion happy and our finance director happy at the same time was a mission impossible. And often, as a local government officer, it feels like, that actually you can't keep everyone happy all the time. But actually, I think it was a sign of a willingness to come together, and when we published our plan in March, that there was a huge amount of momentum that the pandemic frustratingly got in the way of over the months that immediately followed. That bringing people together, both literally and figuratively, became that much more difficult. But I think the pandemic illustrates the key message for why we chose to become ambitious on climate change, and that's one of social justice. And that's how we keep the finance director happy, because that's in terms of our mission as a public sector body, as a local authority in London, that's at the heart of what we're doing. And so I'm sure other people will say this more articulately in this conference, perhaps because they've got more than 10 minutes, but you know, on climate emergency, just as with COVID, it's going to impact on the poor and vulnerable most of all, globally and here in Lewisham, and that's why we want to be involved. So our action plan, when we published it, we had 143 actions. We went big. We tried to have actions on everything, and a series of whole themes. The one which feels most kind of relevant and pertinent is around inspiring, learning, and lobbying. Lobbying because we need government to act. We need to sharpen our ask so that when the money is available, it's not being spent in a random way and is being used more purposefully. Learning because it's so easy to get head down. There's a huge amount of amazing things that are going on in the borough and elsewhere that we want to be able to kind of, you know, move alongside, be part of, learn from, and put into practice ourselves. And inspiring because we won't get there by telling people what to do. And my final slide is kind of about what I think Inspire means for us in terms of our plan going forward, because Lewisham was supposed to be Borough of Culture in 21. And that got pushed back. Each year there's a London borough that's Borough of Culture. We got pushed back a year, and action on climate change was front and centre of our plan for our Borough of Culture. And you can see there some of the things that we are going to be doing in 2022: a carnival, an installation of a large outdoor performance, a carbon neutral theatre, and one of the things that I was looking forward to most was embedding an artist in our climate emergency team. And I had been kind of working out which side, you know, would have been the best side for them to work on. But you know, delivering on our ambition is about changing culture, you know, and the best way to do that is through our own citizens, and through the theatre, through music, through poetry, through literature, because those are the ways in which we will reach out to people's hearts and minds, and not some of the dusty committee reports that I produce. You know, there are a few dogged and valiant individuals who read those committee reports, but actually, you know, what we need is, yes, we need the infrastructure, yes, we need the economic and fiscal change, but you know, Lewisham is lobbying on those things, but engagement feels like the big one that we as an authority can be involved in, because locally it's within our power to, you know, to do that work of coming together with people and using culture to reach out and bring about change. And that was what I was going to cover.
It's lovely, Mark.
10 minutes.
Thank you very much. It's really interesting to see, you know, you've got big challenges, and really the thing that you highlighted sticking out around domestic heating there, but also positive messages of engagement, because that is going to be the way we tackle this. I love the idea of using your City of Culture initiative to kind of use to maximise that as well. So thanks very much. I just want to say, before we move on, people do feel free to start putting some questions in the chat. I don't think we have any at all at the moment, but we'll come back to the questions at the end. So moving on, I'm delighted to introduce two people from London Borough of Wandsworth, Councillor Rory O'Brien, and also Cabinet Member, I understand, and also Paul Chadwick, who's the Director of Environment and Community Services. So I think you're going to share this presentation. Am I right?
Yeah, hopefully.
Yes.
Good, over to you. Thanks very much.
Thank you, and hopefully you can hear me too.
We can certainly hear you. Do you want to just put your slides on full screen?
Yeah, we're just wrestling.
Yeah, can you not see it full screen?
It just needs to go into slide mode, I think, from beginning at the top left, but otherwise nearly there.
Okay. Right, well, according to my look, it's there as a slideshow. All right, from beginning, here we go.
We'll certainly
okay.
That. Great.
Yeah. Still
okay.
not there?
It's fine.
Okay. Well, look, I'll start. It'll work well like this, I'm sure. Thank you. Thank you for the introduction and for the invitation. As you were saying, I'm Rory O'Brien. I mean, this time last year, I was merely the cabinet member for finance and corporate resources. And so it's really a sign of the change and the work and the importance of this to us that We've made climate sustainability a cabinet level position, and sat within the finance function, because again, very much as Martin was saying for Lewisham, we recognise that to do this properly, it needs to sit across everything that we do as a council, and so needs to sit in the middle of our finance and resources team. Our journey began, it began in 2019, and if you move on to the next slide, Paul, although I must say I can't see it on the main screen. Hopefully others can.
Yeah. Hopefully you see the next slide, everybody. Yeah.
You can. Good. Our vision for net zero. So we declared a climate emergency in July 2019, and set a target of becoming carbon neutral organisation by 2030. I say our journey began there, but actually I think the real prompt for us to do so was it's something that actually clearly got a lot of attention last year, with a lot of the activity on the streets, the commitment then of the government that it made towards that net zero emissions. But I think we recognised in Wandsworth that this has been something that had been important to all of our councillors, both Conservative, Labour, for a very long time, and we'd already done a lot in this area that we wanted to bring together. Paul will talk about our work on electric vehicles. I mean, in Wandsworth, we have from, I think, a take of about 450 in 2012. By 2019, it was over 4,500 active plug-in vehicles in Wandsworth, and so this was something we were starting from, I think, a good base. I think the second thing that I would say before moving on to the next slide is we recognised immediately that it was important to move quickly, that 2030 comes around very, very soon. And so straight after that July meeting, we cracked on with actually coming up with a strategy and an action plan by the next cycle of meetings at the end of the year. And so that by coming into 2020, we were already working on an action plan. But speed was important. And as you'll see there, that is really our vision. So to be a community living within our environmental limits, we have the specific commitments of becoming carbon neutral organisation, but we want it to be broader than that. We want it to be inherent in our culture, that we see ourselves as a green borough in all of that, in all of the meanings that can be attached to that term. Again, as Martin drew out, it has to be cultural. If you move on to the next slide, please. Or what this means in practice. Thank you so much. And for us, again, this is, the slide speaks for itself, but I think what has been important for us to recognise, and it's something we're constantly working with and battling with, which is primarily we can control our organisation, and we have huge influence outside of it. In terms of carbon footprint, everybody in Wandsworth will have to have a role if we're going to hit our targets. And so we really see this as two parts. One is getting ourselves, in order, and it's a very large organisation, and as you'll see, accounts for a meaningful percent of borough emissions, the council alone. But secondly, how can we help influence the rest of the borough? How can we, in our role, drive behavioural change? We won't be able to do it all, but we do have a leadership role, and we need to make it count. Move on to the ingredients slide, as well. Paul, thank you.
There we are, yeah, there we are.
Thank you so much. And very much part of making it count was clearly in terms of bringing together an action plan and developing it, that we were going to have to engage and wanted to engage. Not only with the community, but we're blessed in Wandsworth with a huge number of experts who are already active in this field, and so there's definitely a heavy degree of humility in our parts that we didn't have all of the answers immediately, and we wanted to hear and learn from both experts resident within the borough and the community groups who are already doing such great work, and then to feed that through our formal ongoing sort of scrutiny processes and structures that we have in place. I'm conscious of time. I will just touch there on our investment. Community infrastructure levy is something that we have looked to, and we believe climate change is a very sort of legitimate and important use of that. And so we ring-fence £5 million of funding schemes that we will be spending over the coming years. And that forms part of a £20 million capital investment plan. So we think it's really important, as it was actually to have the resource available to support this work. We now have built up a team of 4 dedicated climate change officers. And when it comes to, for example, procuring external funding, we're already really seeing the benefit of having a dedicated team who are able to move quickly, who are able to stay focused on what our plan is and what's needed. And so that organization has really been key to what we've done. We'll move on to some of the highlights of what we've been doing in 2020, and I'll hand over to you, Paul, because
thank you, Councillor.
I think it's been important. It's been a difficult year, but we've tried to keep moving.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. So just turning to that last point, yes, we got 4 dedicated climate change officers, but a bit like Martin O'Brien previously, we've got an action plan that's huge. It's about 50 overarching actions, but when you look at the subsets of those actions, we've actually probably got about the same numbers, 150 individual bits of action, and being delivered by hundreds of officers. Actually, I've got 600 and odd officers that I oversee. I reckon there's about 300 of those officers at least involved in our action plan to one extent or another. And I think that's a sign of our commitment. And those actions aren't just there from 2019 and our declarations onwards. There've been there, many of them there for some while before that, which I think is a sign of our commitment at Wandsworth to sustainability and climate change action more generally. In terms of our actual delivery of actions this year, I'm going to just pick up some highlights. Building on that hearts and minds point, we've got a Love to Garden programme this year, which has been really successful. Got those hearts and minds interested in the garden and its links to mental health, never mind biodiversity, and really got a lot of interest going in that programme. And it's actually been supplemented by delivery on the ground of a new tree programme, tree planting about 500 trees this year. And we're going to add to that year on year. And hopefully there'll be thousands of new trees planted in the borough over the coming years. And that picture there of the young girl reminds me of the influence of our children in the borough. And we think that's really important. Another example of a program I've got directly involved in was the Dragon's Den program for essentially our primary schools. We got them all in a hall, most of them, and they all generated their own thoughts. The children themselves generated their own thoughts about what they could deliver in climate change terms as actions in their school. And it was really exciting to see them all generating these ideas and influencing their teachers, actually, rather than the other way around. And actually, we had the best ideas were presented to a Dragon's Den that included the leader of the council. But the important point is that the energy in the room was fantastic, and the way they wanted to influence not just their teachers but their parents and their aunties and uncles. And I think we'd all agree that's something massive to build on for the future. There's a real strong link, we believe, and I think you'll all recognise this, between our recovery from COVID and our climate change action plans. They're really integrated, many of our actions. And a good example would be shopping local, just one of many examples, but taking advantage of the more local-based shopping that we've seen in COVID and building on that for the future in a way that both keeps a strong local economy and cuts down on our carbon emissions, we see as being a really important facet of the future. Hopefully you've now seen the next page, which is really good timing, this conference, actually, because at Wandsworth we've got our Climate Change Summit starting tomorrow, in fact. And I think, Councillor Bryn, we've got about 500 participants across the borough already from the community. That's right. Thereabouts. Hopefully more by the end of the week will have joined us. And it's been led by the council, but again, it's about that hearts and minds thing that's been mentioned, with 6 themed live events based on why we're doing this, how we can improve on our recycling and waste. Third, how people can go about greening their home using grants and the like, and doing it without grants. Fourthly, transport. I'll kind of turn to that a little bit more in a moment around electric vehicle charging, for example. Green space, and I've touched on that already. And just more broadly, how to get involved locally. Again, that hearts and minds thing. So a really important week for us coming up at Wandsworth, and myself and Councillor Bryn will be heavily involved.
Paul, can I just say, can you just wind up in a few moments, and maybe we could come back to the transport so that we can give Scott a chance.
Oh dear. Okay, e-cargo bikes. There's an example of a particular action. 13 cargo bikes in the borough already, funded by ourselves and Department of Transport, saving on short trip journeys already. Decarbonising the borough's assets, 100% zero carbon electricity already. I'm going to whiz through because I want to want to touch on electric vehicle charging points now, if you don't mind. Is that okay?
Very quickly.
All right, well, let's come back to it. Hopefully there'll be a question on it and I'll answer it there.
That's lovely. Thanks very much. Well, thank you both so much. So much. I mean, you're just covering such a range of issues, but let's go to Scott, Councillor Scott Patient, who's a Cabinet Member for Climate Change and Resilience in Calderdale, just to hear from the north, and we'll hopefully have time for some questions. Are you with us?
Gina, just to interrupt, the reason there's no questions is because the chat's disabled.
I was wondering, Ben, could you help with that, please?
Yeah, sorry, it should, could someone try it again? I've been playing around with the settings, it should work now, but I will keep playing.
If not, we'll take a couple from the participants, but Scott, fire away with Calderdale's carbon actions. Are you on mute? You're on mute, I think, Scott.
There we go. Sorry about that. Oh, my screen sharing stops now. Hang on, one moment. Sorry, I'll get this. And if I don't, it doesn't matter. Right. Is that okay? Can you hear me and see me?
Yeah.
No, it's not working. It's not working. Forget it. Okay, so thanks for the introduction. I'm from Calderdale Council. Some of you might know Calderdale. I think we're famous for two things: incredible edible, which you might well know. I think that's reached all across the globe, and flooding. I think the flooding has sort of sharpened our resolve. We're not a large metro. We're nestled in between Leeds and Manchester. Probably a lot of you will know places like Hebden Bridge and Halifax that sort of fall within Calderdale. I think just broadly to say, we declared a climate and ecological emergency in January 2019, off the back, I think, specifically of that activism from Extinction Rebellion and from Greta Thunberg, but as well as because I think it was an opportunity to sharpen our resolve in terms of the work already being done, broader across partnerships to stop our acute risk of climate change. We kind of not joke here, but we say we're living the climate emergency. Our sort of dual threats from moorland fire and from flooding have been absolutely massive, especially over the last 10 years. We've had 4 extreme floods. I'm sure a couple of them have reached national reporting, and we frequently have moorland fires. We fall on the Pennines, so we do have that acute risk. I think that underpins where we're coming from in terms of our action plan that's based entirely around the idea of climate justice. Those that are at the bottom of the valley are those that suffer the worst. Those at the bottom of the valley have lower quality housing. We've obviously got quite a lot of leaky housing here due to our Victorian infrastructure, and that poses a huge challenge going forward. I think to solidify what that means is those partnerships that we've put in place because of our response to flooding have helped inform how we go forward. And I think looking from a regional, because we've got the West Yorkshire Combined Authority above us who are already doing quite a lot of work on this agenda, to us, down to the work town councils are doing. And we're really lucky that our town councils are engaged with the climate emergency. I think 4 out of 6 of them have declared their own emergencies. And we have actual parish councillors who are members of the Tyndall Centre and the Committee of Climate Change. So we've got a real wealth of experience and knowledge to draw from. But the main thing, I think the main people we wanted to engage, and the people who are the most engaged, are the young people of the borough. They've been the ones pushing us all the way. They're the ones that are going to inherit what this ecological and environmental emergency means. And we've made sure that we embedded them right from the start in our climate change working party, in the work that we do, invitations to all of our committees and working parties, and they're doing some incredible work going forward. I think what we wanted to do when we started developing our action plan was underpinning the stuff that is happening here already. So food and food growing is at the heart of what we're trying to do, and encourage a sustainable look and approach to how we're doing that, and thinking about agriculture and what our land is being used for. Also, obviously thinking about communities and the obvious bits that have been spoken before in terms of energy and transport as well. We've definitely done the easy stuff. We've sort of picked those low-hanging fruit. You know, we had an ambition to have a 40% reduction by 2020. But let's be fair, like most of us, I think decarbonisation of the grid has helped us get quite a lot of the way there. So I think it's now we're on the path to doing some of those really, really difficult bits. So we've developed an emission reduction pathway in tandem with the West Yorkshire Combined Authority in terms of how we move forward. And we're developing quite closely our climate emergency goals with that sort of regional bent in mind as well. I think going forwards, you're right, there's quite a bit of mention here about culture change and that ownership, and I think that's really, really important. So the first thing we did was, as a council, make sure that we embedded that culture change within all the council systems. So my portfolio is cross-cutting, and I think that's great, but the reality is I'm only one person and I can't get everywhere all the time. So we developed, I think we were the first council to develop a climate emergency employer HR scheme, so that actually there's incentives for active travel, there's incentives for working from home. Some of these have been made slightly easier with where we go. I don't want to say that COVID has provided opportunities, but in terms of some of the stuff we're doing within our HR, the climate emergency employer bit, it's made some stuff easier. I mean, for God's sake, there was actual benefits in terms of buying and hiring cars there, like until we scrapped it and got back to it and started to explore some different options. And also we've implored all of our officers, we've made it mandatory to do carbon literacy training. At first it was something, it was part of the training scheme, and actually quite a lot of them were refusing it, bizarrely. So we're making sure that that's a mandatory scheme for both elected members and officers within the council. And we're having some really good feedback from there. We've embedded COVID champions into every single aspect of the council, and I think that's a really important thing to do. There are some threats, though. I think we've managed to secure about around 500 million in capital investment in Calderdale. I think we're the largest amount of capital investment in the UK. And as we know, capital investment is building things, and we've made sure that before those schemes even start, that our priorities, our three corporate priorities of reducing inequalities, building sustainable towns, and the climate emergency are embedded there right from the start. And there's an oversight committee to make sure that that does indeed happen, and it's not just paid lip service to, because I think there was an issue to start with in terms of our papers having an ecological impact assessment, and it wasn't happening properly. So we're just doubling down on what we need to do, more broadly speaking. Just to quickly go back in terms of the flooding, I mean, we had over 4,500 businesses and homes impacted by those flooding events from 2015 and earlier this year. And I think what that gives us is a massive amount of opportunity to build the coalitions of the winning with those communities that are already engaged and understand what the climate emergency means for their communities. We're doing a massive amount of work in terms of mental health, because it isn't just something that goes away once you've cleaned your house. These are anxieties that stay with the whole community. But here in Calderdale, there are other places that haven't been affected by flooding. There are other places with in the indices of multiple deprivation that have very, very different risks and threats, you know, like when they're putting the next meal on the table. And our immediate thing was not just building those coalitions with those that get it, but really drilling down with those that perhaps don't, and doing quite a lot of outreach work with our partners in the voluntary community sector to get those communities on board. And that's really paying dividends. Our voluntary community sector are brilliant, and we've got some excellent advocates in there. And all of a sudden we're seeing people that never ever considered what the climate emergency might mean for them, understanding how it might mean increased food prices, how it might mean, you know, various different factors in terms of air quality across the board. So I'm mindful of the time, and I'm aware that Martin made reference to other people being more articulate. So I'm sorry I perhaps didn't do the more articulate thing. I'm just trying to throw things at the screen, but I reckon I'm happy to move into questions. But
thank you, and I'm aware we have literally only got 7 minutes if people hang on till the last minute before the next session. So I just want to pick up one of the questions that's come up in the chat, which I think is quite important. And this is about how you've engaged with other, with local business and with anchor institutions in your patches. And there is also an important issue there about monitoring and performance management of reductions. But maybe you'd all just like to just comment on one or the other of those issues, starting with Martin, if you want to.
Yeah, happy to do that. On the point about measuring, which is a really good one, you know, because you know, what we measure ends up getting managed, you know. And I know from looking at my action plan, you know, having published it back in March, I'm in the process now of kind of doing an update of where we've got to on things. And actually, in some cases, you know, I talked about we've got 143 actions. Actually, sometimes less is more. If you can have better, smarter, more focused actions that actually set out what you're trying to measure, then underneath that there are, you know, tens, hundreds of individual things that will have to happen in order for you to drive down delivery on what you're trying to measure. So I think that measurement point is a really good one. The what we're doing to engage with people, you know, it's a really tricky one since the impact of COVID, because, you know, we are acutely aware within our own organisation and within our partner organisations that they will have lost a lot of capacity. People have been diverted onto other things. There will be a lot of individuals and businesses whose, you know, economic circumstances changed overnight. And so what we published our action plan in the middle of March, and what we couldn't, you know, we just couldn't do is just go out and start promoting that in the normal way. So I think, you know, what we need is to find smarter and better ways of having those conversations, and it being embedded about, you know, what people actually need, because there's no doubt that, you know, delivering on a climate agenda is going to be part of how we respond and support businesses going forward. You know, I think that we have to try and use the climate emergency to actually help our local businesses, you know, and I think colleagues and the other two presentations talked about some of that.
Lovely, thank you. Has anyone else got anything to add on those points?
Councillor O'Brien, I'll just say two things very, very quickly. One, because there's a question in the chat about carbon literacy. Wandsworth, we're developing our own plan, but we're using the Carbon Literacy Project for accreditation. So I just endorse their use for those who are asking about that. They're really valuable. And then I would just, again, on the business engagement, it's very important to us. I think it's fair to say this year it is going hand in hand with the impact on COVID, which has just been so disastrous for so many businesses. And so actually it's about looking at the two things at the same time. So we've had a number of schemes whereby over the summer we've made it easier for businesses to come out onto the streets, restaurants to come out onto the streets and to shut them, and to allow it easier for pedestrians to move, for bikes to move, and so take the opportunity to promote more sustainable transport at the same time as trying to tackle some of these COVID impact problems. And it's through doing that it's the beginning of, you know, the influence to show the benefits of doing that to businesses and striking up the conversations on it.
Lovely, thank you. And Scott, have you got anything to add?
I mean, just to build on that, I mean, exactly right, following those comments, and we've been doing some e-cargo bike work as well, which has been really well received. I've been doing some volunteering with that, especially difficult with our hills around here, so perhaps a little bit of a different thing. But what's really important, I think, if you can get one employer on board, I mean, we've got Suma in Calderdale, I think the largest co-op in England. But what's more important than that is we've got one person that was what he described himself as an oil baron, that has now shifted his entire business model towards renewables, not because he's an environmental advocate, but because he can see the writing on the wall in terms of the sustainability of his business. And I think if you can get one person that's talking like that, that is immeasurable in terms of what that can do for the business community. So we're using that guy as a sort of exemplar and giving him as much airtime as we possibly can. And I think doing that is a real big move in the right direction.
Thank you so much. I mean, I've had somebody saying, could we go on? But I'm very reluctant to extend the time for this workshop because there's so much important stuff going on across the piece today. And I just want to say a huge thank you for all the work you're doing, but sharing that so succinctly here with us. And apologies to anyone who hasn't had their questions answered. And I should have said at the beginning that the session has been recorded. Thanks to Ben for doing that. So we will get a chance to see some of this and the links and workshop reports, or at least the information shared. So just to say again, thanks very much to Martin O'Brien, Paul Chadwick, Rory O'Brien and Councillor Scott Pation. And I let you all get off for a minute before your next workshop of your choice starts. So thanks from Lancaster. Bye for now.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Ben, I'll stay on just for a moment to talk to you.
Thanks a lot. Cheerio.
Just to say thanks a lot, Scott. Thank you. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you. Bye-bye.
That was really great, guys. Thank you very much.
Yeah, really good. Thank you.
Good luck. Cheers. Thanks. Bye.
Sorry, I didn't press the record button so that you had backup, but yours was recorded.